Welcome to Heartbreak and Hope with Pat Barbarito, the show that explores how to build up or break down any relationship with confidence, clarity, and compassion. A connection of the heart goes way beyond being physically present. Did you ever have a situation where you're out without your partner, but you know you have a partner? So your heart is full. You feel secure. You feel safe. You feel connected. It's enriching. Today, though, we're not talking about any kinds of intimacy. We're talking about romantic relationships. The thing that many of us search for, and well, maybe not everybody, but most of us are drawn to partners that provide warmth, connections through good times and bad. They provide us with such tremendous joys and sadly, sometimes such pain. It's kind of simple, right? Everybody's looking for it. Everybody wants the connection. Shouldn't be that hard to find it, but it eludes so many of us. I make it a point to talk to people about relationships all the time. I'm a divorce lawyer. I have this podcast. I'm in the relationship business. I talk to young people in their 20s, friends of my daughters. I talk to young people at my office in their 30s and 40s. And I talk to people my age in their 60s and 70s. And the one thing that everybody has in common, or most people do, is that they're searching, they're looking, they want a connection. I believe, as my mother used to say, there's a lid for every pot. The thing is that most people don't know what it takes to go into a successful relationship. They just haven't figured it out. Our guest today is going to talk to us about this. I am so excited to have nationally recognized psychotherapist Beatty Cohan with us. She's a sex therapist, an author of For Better or Worse Forever, Discover the Path to Lasting Love. She's an advice columnist for Dan's Papers in the Hamptons and Palm Beach, a national speaker, national radio and television expert guest, and the host of the weekly Ask Beatty show on the Progressive Radio Network, which I've had the privilege of being a guest on. She has a private practice in New York City and East Hampton. Now, Beatty, despite this need to have the heart protected, to love each other, statistics that you have shared with me are shocking because these statistics go against everything that I'm talking about. Let me just share with our audience some statistics you shared with me and you've examined. Every day, 4 women die in the United States as a result of domestic violence by their intimate partner. Every year, 1.2 million women are forcibly raped by their current or former male partner. 30% of college students report dating abuse. 25% of high school students in the U.S. have been physically or sexually abused by their intimate partner. And what's worse, divorce rate for first marriages is 48%, second is 67%, and for third marriages is 73%. So, despite all the relationships, books, coaches, rehabs, help, therapists, we seem to not be able to figure it out. And that's what Beatty is here for. But before we talk about your approach and your thoughts about failed marriages, Beatty, when I was researching you, what was fascinating to me is I saw a wedding announcement that you got married at 67 again. So before we talk about this, and we've got lots to talk about, I'd love you to share why, what, how you figured that out at 67.
Well, what had happened is that I had been a widow after a very, very long marriage. I was living in Sarasota, Florida. My husband died very unexpectedly, and I had no plans to move at that point. I was not interested, obviously, in dating. I was in a state of mourning. And it was about 6 months to a year after Elliot died that I received an email from Jim. Now, Jim was my childhood sweetheart when we were in college. And we actually dated for a very, very short time. And I'm Canadian, and I had been in an American university for a short period of time. And then I went back to Canada to live my life. So here I get this email. I mean, literally from out of the blue, we'd had no contact for our entire adult life. And I was coming to New York to see my daughter. And I think at the time I was also coming to do a television show. And I was coming to New York actually on a regular basis because Jordana, my daughter, was a student at NYU. And I regularly was an expert guest on Fox and, different television shows. So Jim and I met. And it was so interesting. He walked through the door, and after all those years, he looked very, very handsome. And I was very, very nervous. And I remember we went out for Chinese food, and there was something there. He had been divorced after a very long marriage as well. And there was history there, even though the history had been really a very short history in the context of life, because we'd only dated as kids, probably for less than a year. So we decided that we would keep in touch. I went back to Sarasota. I had my practice, my TV, my radio, my life, my friends, my tennis, the sun. And we continued to communicate, and I started to come to New York on a more regular basis, and we fell in love. But
I
let me
think that's
say,
a lovely story.
but let me just say that I had clarity about relationships that I never, ever, ever had until I did my original research.
So that's what I want to talk to you about, because
Right.
the reason I started with that story is because I'm not so sure, and I don't know, had you not had clarity, done the work, understood it, had
Right.
you been able to enter into a healthy, obviously, marriage or relationship older. And one of the things I know you write about and you talk about is relationships fail for 4 reasons. Can you tell us about that, Beatty?
Number one, of each of us is not in a good place emotionally, psychologically, psychiatrically, if we are not willing to deal with our depression and our anxiety and our early child sexual abuse trauma and having grown up in a dysfunctional family. And of course, we can't change history. We are not going to be able to have a successful relationship with anyone. And I used to tell my daughter, Jordana, all the time, she probably heard her mother talking way too much about relationships, but the relationship needs to be the icing on the cake. And we need to be the cake. We need to be solid. We need to be in a good place where we are not looking for someone to save us and make us whole. We need to be okay. And then the relationship can add one, as we both know, wonderful, wonderful dimensions to our
But
lives.
until you learn that, I think people look for the relationship to make you whole as
Right.
opposed to being whole and do the work. What's the next reason that relationships fail?
I think that despite all of the talk about mental health and self-help and therapists and love coaches, I think that most people, or at least the majority of people, have absolutely no idea what ingredients really need to be present in a healthy long-term relationship. So we have some work to do. We have work to do on ourselves, and we need to learn what actually has to be present. It's not enough to just have a great sex life. I mean, we all want great sex lives, but there's so many more things, fundamental things like love and respect and compassion and great communication and problem solving and all of the different things that I came up with when I did my research with 450 people. It was a big research project in the Boston, Providence, and Connecticut area. And these were single people, single, separated, divorced, widowed men and women. And I came up with a 10-step formula.
We're going to go there because I am so excited about sharing the solutions and the formula with our audience. But if you could give us the third reason that relationships fail.
Well, we need to know how to do a good assessment, which is what my formula is all about. And number 4, the art or lost art, or maybe there was never an art of communication and problem solving. I mean, people have difficulty having conversations, leave alone difficulty having political conversations. People have difficulty having conversations where there is a give and a take and a respect and some compassion and understanding, where we hopefully in our differences can come up with a win-win resolution, not the perfect resolution.
Do you think social media and texting and emails has been a contributor to the loss of communication?
I do. I mean, if you're pressing a button and you're talking about likes, or you're talking about, how many people are following you, yes. And, I had an opportunity to do some consulting at a high school in East Hampton, and I really found that the kids, they had real difficulty just talking about issues, talking with each other. Of course, I'm looking around, and they're on their phones, and people are on their phones and on their devices. And with all of this, in quotes, connection, there's so much disconnect. I feel that we're becoming more and more and more disconnected as compared to connected.
Well, I think with the disconnection, people become disposable. It's almost as if you can't see the pain or you can't hear the pain, you could dispose of each other so much easier. And it's painful when somebody just discards you through a text or an email and disconnects. But you have some reasons that you think that people aren't connected. And you've talked about television shows and normalizing these crazy relationships. Can you talk to us about that?
I think that the information out there, again, we've never had so many more self-help books. We've never had so many more television shows on relationships and dating. And, we're really missing the boat. But I think also that therapists are really missing the boat, because the fundamentals are, and after 35 years plus, of being a clinician and doing all the various things that I've done in terms of my research and books, I have clarity. I mean, I have good news. This is all good news, but people have to be willing to learn, and they have to be willing not only to take in the information, but then to put the information into action. People are not interested. People are not really interested in doing the work and in getting themselves together, in realizing that unless we're in a good place, we're not going to be able to find and maintain a successful relationship with anybody. People don't want typically to do this, Patricia.
They don't want to do what? The work. They don't want to do. Well, because it's pain. But wait, let's be real. I've done the work, right, and I get it, and I have clarity, and my life is great, but it's painful to do the work. Let's be clear about that. So there are people who say, I'd rather stay in pain than do the work. Now, the one thing I'll guarantee is if you do the work, coming out the other end is the best part of your life, but people don't want it.
Right. And we fool ourselves in really believing that somebody is going to save us, and that the relationship is somehow going to make us whole, and it's going to make, all of our trauma and our depression and our anxiety and our old unfinished business and what I call skeletons in the closet, make it right. It's not going to happen. We need to take care of our own business. And then, as I say all the time, we really need to be so careful, Patricia, who we let into our lives.
But Beatty, one of the things I've read that you've written about and you've spoken about is this idea, all we see on TV or in the news are these relationships that get together, break up, and it's almost normalized the insanity of a bad relationship. What do you mean by that? The Kardashians, J-Lo and Ben, all these people. It's almost as if it's business as normal. No big deal. People get together and break up.
Right. And the ratings are very high. It's business. It's big business. It's titillating. And of course, the impact of all of this is significant and extremely negative, extremely destructive, extremely self-destructive. And if we talk about the Golden Bachelor as an example, I had on my radio show world-renowned psychiatrist, Dr. Carol Lieberman. Carol and I did everything possible, because we both have a lot of contacts in the local and national media. We did everything possible to try to get to the producers, to try to get to Teresa, to let them know that this Golden Bachelor, Jerry Turner, was a scam.
Oh,
And
well, tell me about that.
well, I mean, all the red flags on this Golden Bachelor show, okay, they were there. And he turned out to be an admitted liar. And again, the red flags, the signs that this woman, Teresa, who was the chosen one on this show, that she was really getting herself into hot water. So what ended up happening is that nobody responded. I mean, between Dr. Carol Lieber, we were sending emails, we were calling producers, we were calling magazines, we were calling everybody in the media, and nobody was interested.
But red flags don't sell, Beatty. That's
They
what.
don't-
But
they don't-
I want to go back to this because I did not watch The Golden Bachelor. But of course, if you were alive, you read about it. And I had friends who were obsessed with it.
People were.
And you saw that? Because nobody I know who watched it saw it.
It was.
I love this.
It was as clear as day. But
It was him, not her.
well, what ended up happening is that there was an old girlfriend of this Jerry Turner, the Golden Bachelor. She contacted the media and let the media know about some of his history that the producers, when they decided to cast him, missed. I mean, he lied about his occupation. There were so many things that he lied about, the relationship that he'd been in with this woman. And all of this was confirmed, by the way, and verified later on. It was a pretty abusive relationship. And what we're finding out, I mean, in a couple of the dating shows recently, I've been reading that one man was arrested in his marriage for domestic violence, so that the producers are really having to do a much better job in assessing before they make the decision to cast people, where they are then putting participants at risk. And this all has to do really with my formula and the importance of assessing who somebody is and who somebody is not.
And along those lines, did not the person he chose, whoever she was, did she have an obligation to I mean, I'm not saying that the producers shouldn't have paid attention to the red flags, but at some point, doesn't the person you choose, that person have an obligation to understand or to look at the red flags? I mean, we can't afford to be that naive. And it's a little frustrating when I hear that as an excuse. I'm going to be honest with you.
She was extremely naive. It was a big deal to be on national television. It was a big deal for her to have been chosen. I found that she had plenty of her own issues that obviously had never been acknowledged and addressed or resolved. And what ended up happening is that the wedding did occur. And of course, they divorced after 3 months. I mean, that's the big story. So Dr. Carol Lieberman and I mean, none of this was a surprise for us, but we wanted to warn women. We wanted to warn Teresa. I was trying every possible way to reach this Teresa Nist and let her know that there was nothing in this for Dr. Lieberman and myself other than saying, hey, you're in trouble. This guy is not who he appears to be, but we're not learning. One of my little phrases is lessons to be learned or not. When 25% of high school girls are in physically or emotionally, psychologically damaging relationships, we're fooling ourselves, but yet we know, and I have been trying for years. And I'll tell you a little vignette. When I lived in Florida, I was with ABC TV, and I had 3 Ask Beatty segments every week. And who calls me? Well, I get a personal call from Governor Bush at the time. It was like, wow. And I had never been involved in the political arena in any way. So Jeb Bush, he appoints me to Florida State Commission on Marriage and Family Support Initiatives for the sole purpose of implementing my program based on my research and based on my books into the high schools and colleges and universities in the state of Florida. So it's like, wow, this is great. There's going to be an opportunity here to teach the kids something substantial about relationships. So for 2 years, I was Commissioner Beatty Cohan, and I met with every single major decision maker in the state of Florida. I would go here, I would go there. I was in Tallahassee. I was everywhere. And what I discovered, and this is really sad but true, is that there was nobody that cared about the issue other than the guidance counselors in the schools.
So you're telling me that there was an opportunity, or at least
Yes.
a possibility, of
Yes.
integrating that itinerary
Yes.
into,
Yes.
because I know one of the things I've heard you speak about is we are not teaching young people the
Right.
tools to have successful relationships.
Right.
And it's not a coincidence that they're not having them. So
Right.
how do you think we could accomplish that? Do you think we could accomplish that in a educational setting, in a grade school setting?
Absolutely. Education is, when you think about it, if the kids are not getting it at home because maybe the parents never were fortunate enough to learn any of this, we have a captive audience in the schools. We really do. And yet recently, and I've been tracking this and I've been talking about this on my show, I have contacted many, many schools here in New York City, private schools, public schools, to pitch the idea of at least thinking about implementing the program or having me give some presentations. And for me, it's not about selling books. And the response so far is zero response. So if the educators don't care, and if the parents don't either care or know how important it is to educate and empower their kids and keep the children safe, keep the young adults safe, we're really hitting a brick wall. And, the lesson that I learned in Florida was, look, let's not fool ourselves. There was a major opportunity. And at the time, Jeb Bush's daughter was having significant problems. Everybody was talking about it in the media. And I guess that one of his advisors had seen me on ABC. But when I say that nobody cared, and even here in New York City, I'm tracking the schools, I'm tracking the psychologists who I try to reach, and I'm getting no response.
Which is amazing, because if you
Yeah.
really think about it, if you could have a healthy connection in your life at an early age, a lot of problems that stem from not healthy relationships, life's issues, even education, poverty, antisocial behavior, could in fact be addressed. I'm not saying it's a magic solution, but there's so much that grows out of an inability to connect, I believe.
Well, we are in the midst of a mental health crisis, and we're also in the midst of a mental health crisis with our young people. The numbers are staggering, and the suicide ideation numbers are really high. And again, I feel that the schools have a real opportunity. No, we don't want to turn our schools into psychiatric wards.
No.
But we could do a lot more. And the disastrous downward spiral that we are seeing statistically in the world of relationships, there are answers.
You have a formula for creating a successful relationship. And I believe it's a 10-step formula. And I'd love you to go over that with our audience, because I found it inspiring, encouraging, and it made sense.
What the formula actually is, it's an assessment formula. Before I
What do you
did
mean by that?
Okay, we assess everything in our life, our creams, our lipsticks, our cars, our computers, and our cell phones. And we don't think about the importance of assessing, who is this person that we think we're in love with? Who is this person that we think we would like to marry? So that the research was about the 10-step formula, which is an assessment formula. So before I did this, I would meet somebody and I'd say, I've met a lovely person, right? I would never make that comment today. I would say, I met somebody who appears to be a lovely person. And my research found that it takes about a year, really, to find out who somebody is and is not using the formula, unless there are so many red flags that you really need to get out of the relationship and extricate yourself from the relationship as soon as possible. So in looking at the 10 steps, it's a roadmap, starting with one's family of origin. Now, you're not going to put the person on the stand like you're in a courtroom, but you're going to say, well, maybe, what was it like growing up in your family? In my family, it was this, it was that. Now, you're not going to also throw away the person because they happen to grow up in a dysfunctional family. But what you want to hear, my parents, they had a lot of problems. There was substance abuse. There may have been domestic violence. But because I didn't want to repeat history, I went for counseling. I did a lot of reading, and I'm in a place that's very, very different than where I was years ago, because I knew that I needed to do some work and I didn't want to repeat the history of what it was like growing up in my family. Now, the person may say that, but we'll find out. We'll actually see as we continue this assessment whether or not this person is in fact in a much better place than he or she was, years ago, growing up, let's say, in a very dysfunctional family. Other
So
thing,
number one is to look at the family background,
yeah, to look
see if
at that.
it's a positive one, see
Yeah,
if they addressed it, see if they worked it through therapeutically. And
yeah,
that's the beginning of the assessment. What's the
that
next step, Beatty?
all right. You want to find out what I call skeletons in the closet. Things like substance abuse, things like verbal abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, financial abuse. So you're not going to find this out in the first couple of weeks or even the first couple of months when you're dating someone, because everybody is really on their best behavior. But you have to be honest with yourself and you have to look carefully. And I have found that you really start to see the reality of who somebody is, whether or not they have their act together or they don't have their act together when there is a problem. So when problems arise, as they do in every relationship, it's actually a really good thing, because they're then able to see how able to talk with each other about what it is that's going on. How well or how badly are we going to be able to effectively solve the issue? So that, when somebody says, oh, well, we never have a problem and we never argue and everything is just perfect. I don't think so, because there are always going to be things that are going to surface. And then you start to see what's really going on. Are you being gaslighted? Are you being invalidated? Is the person defensive? Is the person avoiding? Is the person saying, I don't want to talk to you? Is the person blaming you? I mean, all of this starts to surface.
One of the things that when I started dating, I had a list of values and criteria was if somebody was angry at their ex-spouse, because you hear a lot of targeted anger. There's something that hasn't been worked through. And I think you need to really hear that. What people do, though, and I've seen many women do this. Oh, well, it was all her. It was none of him. They make excuses. They try. Red flag.
Exactly.
And you also talk about you could continue to unfold and find out about the skeletons. How do you do that? How do you continue to learn about them?
You ask a lot of questions and you have to really trust your gut feeling. If something feels wrong, you need to address it. We need to be willing to acknowledge and address and resolve as best as we can the things that continue to get in the way of our relationships and in the way of our life, rather than avoid, rather than deny, rather than blame somebody else. So that's, as they say, as the relationship unfolds, real life things are going to happen. And because we want to be loved, because we want that closeness, because we want our happily ever after, it's very, very easy to avoid looking at the reality, which is really oftentimes right in front of us. But we don't want to make waves, and it is always, always a problem. And for example, when I talk about emotional intimacy, that means caring and sharing and respect and compassion. And how was your day? And can I help you? And that's what that is. And you can have a great emotional connection and not have that sexual attraction. And I think it's very easy sometimes to confuse, great sex with a great emotional connection. And of course, naturally, we want both.
But I think great emotional intimacy leads to great sex. I don't think great sex leads to emotional intimacy, but that's how I see it. I don't know if you see it the same way.
Not necessarily. I think that you can have a great emotional intimacy connection and you should just better be friends. And you can be close and you can be supportive. And let's not fool ourselves that chemistry is somehow going to happen if it's not there. I mean, we know what we
are. Know when you know.
Attract. You know what you know. And it's the same thing with having, a great sexual connection. You can have a great sexual connection and a great sex life, but that there is not that emotional intimacy, the caring, the sharing, the how was your day, the respect, I love you, what can I do to make your day better? So we have to be clear and be able to differentiate A from B and not confuse it. But if you're confused yourself about what's really important and what ingredients really go into a successful relationship, it's very easy to fool ourselves because we want that love connection.
So much so that we avoid or we decide not to see things. What is the next step in the formula?
We want to look at old baggage. Again, not putting the person on the stand. And I want to know about your past relationships. I want to know what happened, what your perspective was, and why things didn't work out. And as you were saying, it's very easy to blame the other person. But the reality is that we dance a dance. Whether we know we're dancing a dance with the other person, we are dancing a dance. And I would like to hear something like, I had a great wife, or I had a great husband or partner, but I worked too much and I didn't take care. I didn't respect the sanctity of our relationship. And then I went out and I had an affair and I really ruined everything. And now I understand why she didn't want to have sex with me. Now I understand because of my own behavior, my own selfish behavior, my own inconsiderate behavior to what happened. Now, should I have married this person originally? Well, maybe if I'd had your formula, Beatty, maybe I wouldn't have. But I own what I did. And now I know what I have to do if I ever want to have a successful relationship in the future. I mean, that's a really mature, that's a really insightful
Oh,
person
yeah.
who's gained that kind of self-knowledge.
But Beatty, especially in second marriages or people of a certain age, I'm in my
Right.
late 60s. If you are not speaking with someone at that level
Right.
who's taking responsibility, it is not going to be a successful relationship. That's a really simple thing to say, but that's so accurate. If somebody is still being a victim,
Right.
or it's never going to work. One of the parts of your formula that I found interesting is the problem solving, the art of compromise. What do you mean by that?
We all have problems, and there are always going to be problems. And I want to find out whether or not my partner would have the capacity to discuss respectfully, to negotiate differences, to make some trade offs, perhaps, and to come up with a win win resolution. This win lose mentality, it's a killer. It's a killer politically, it's also a killer personally. So the idea is that we have our differences, and it's not the differences that are the problem, it's how well or how badly are we as a couple, do we care enough about each other and about our relationship to try to work things out in a win-win way? And that's the challenge. And that's one of the great things about disagreements when they come up in a relationship, because you have an opportunity to see how is this going to play out in a real life dynamic sort of a way. So it's not that you're going to want to avoid dealing with the issue where you're upset. You want to put it out there. And as you are assessing, as you are evaluating, I want to know how my partner is going to respond to the fact that I'm angry and I'm upset and I feel rejected and I feel disappointed and I feel manipulated and I feel used. It's really important that we communicate all of these feelings honestly and respectfully, and to see whether or not we are actually able as a couple to come up with a win-win resolution.
I think what happens, and I see this all the time, is people see what they want to see, which amazes me because inevitably it's going to be painful. I've done it, so I'm not above it. I'm fortunate, I have a wonderful partner, but when I started re-enter the dating world when I was about 60, I saw what I wanted to see and I worked that all through. And when you stop doing that, you think, okay, it just, I'm seeing it because I'm going to save myself years of pain.
Exactly.
Seeing the red flags.
Right. But it goes back to the first thing, which is that we need to be okay. So that if this doesn't work out, we are not going to fall apart. We are going to be disappointed, but we are going to be grateful and thankful that we learned all of this before committing to any serious relationship like a marriage.
Absolutely. So keep telling us about the formula, because I'm telling you, our audience, this formula works. It will work if you follow it, but you have to go through the steps to follow it, and you have to allow yourself to go through the discomfort of following it.
Yeah,
So tell us
exactly.
your next steps.
Well, chapter 9, deal makers, deal breakers. I mean, really being able to talk about things like values and interests. I mean, if I want to live in Florida and you want to live in Alaska, we're probably going to have some problems unless we have a private plane and we can commute and meet both of our needs. But we have to be, again, honest with ourselves about what's really important. Do I want to be a stepmother to your kids? Well, I may not, but we need to talk about all of this. And even though I may not, is there a way perhaps that we could work something out so that you and I could maintain the relationship, which may mean not even living together, because I don't want to be a step parent to your child or to your children. And what about, religious differences and political differences? And what if I'm a health nut and you just let yourself go and you want to be at the computer all day and I want to be on the tennis courts? I mean, we're going to have some issues. So there are a lot of questions that need to be asked, and you need to take these answers very seriously. But the questions need to be put out so that you have a
Do
very
you
clear sense.
you work with couples? You're a psychotherapist. Do you believe that most people really address those hard issues? Because I think the deal breaker issues are the hardest ones to address. And I don't know. I represent people in divorces all the time, and people have been married for 15, 20 years. They haven't addressed some of those issues.
Yeah,
And they're hard, but
yeah.
without addressing them, you're going to crash, in my humble opinion.
You're absolutely right. And whether or not you've been married for a year or for 35 years, I find all the time that those tough issues have never been dealt with previously. And then there is a crisis, and then they may find themselves in my office. And then we're really having to deal with what happened the first year of marriage when you didn't want to have sex with me, and the resentment that I carried for the past 35 years. So there's a lot to be discovered. But the whole issue and area of assessment is something, as I say, Patricia, that we do in all areas of our life. I mean, we spend more time assessing what kind of a cell phone to buy. We read Consumer Report. We're very busy.
Why do you think that is, Beatty? Why do you think that is? I know we plan vacations, right? We research our face creams. But why is that we don't? Is it too painful? Why is it? Because this was like a light bulb that went off in me in my 60s. I never thought to do that. When I got married, I never occurred to me to think of this stuff, and I made a bad choice.
Right. I never thought to think about this stuff either in this way until I did the research. I think we don't know. We don't know the importance of assessing and evaluating the person who we think we want to spend our life with. It's not sexy. It's not romantic. It's not lovey-dovey. And it's a far cry, I think, in people's minds from the importance of reading Consumer Reports and figuring out what kind of a computer to buy. We haven't aligned the concept of assessment and evaluation when it comes to relationships. And maybe that's why so many people, when they hear about this, they may find it intriguing, but to get in the trenches and do the work, that's something that the majority of people simply do not want to do, which is why we're seeing divorce rates for third marriages of 73%, and why 3 women are killed every single day. And I'm not blaming and I'm not judging. I'm just saying that there's got to be a better way. I mean, I've been at this. The book came out originally in 2000. It's been out in a 3rd edition, but the impact has not been there.
But Beatty, what perplexes me, I go back to how we opened the show. There's such a fundamental need for connection. Every day, we talk to people, to young people, old people, lonely hearts, sadness. There's a desperate need. How is it that we live in a world where people are lonely in their hearts, but don't want to do the work to find? Is it because we live in a society of quick fixes? Is it because it's too painful? How could we be missing this really giant elephant in the room? And again, I missed it for many years. I get it now. How is it? Are we so desperate for connection that we don't want to see it?
I think that podcasts like yours and shows like mine, we need to make sure that people really have an opportunity to hear this kind of thing over and over and over again. And it's really hard to compete with, as you say, the quick fixes that are being presented on social media. You know, I had dinner last night with two young women in their 20s, lovely, lovely women. And they were talking about all the misinformation on TikTok and how their generation, this is where they are getting their information. Whether it's real, whether it's false, this is the place. And I'm listening, I'm listening to all of this. And there's an opportunity for educators. There's an opportunity for people who are really out there. And whether we're talking about Taylor Swifts or people who are worshiped by millions and millions of people, if any one of these people would embrace what we are talking about, that seems to be the way to get the word out.
Because I have a 25-year-old daughter, I have a 32-year-old one who's married, and I listen to her and her friends. I talk way too much when they come over. I sit down, I say, listen, tool, assess, but they want to fall in love and they want happily ever after. And doing the work is difficult. And what do they know? The final things you talk about in your formula is being realistic. There's no such thing as
a perfect partner.
Well, I always say there's no such thing as a perfect partner, but there's somebody who's perfect for me or for you.
Well, maybe not perfect, but pretty darn good.
Right.
The final chapter, is this, where you have to sit down with yourself after hopefully going through this whole process. And you have to ask yourself 3 questions. 1, what I want and need in a long-term relationship. Number 2, what do I not want and need in a long-term relationship? And then the third question is the real question. Describe my relationship. Describe the reality of my relationship. What I want, what I don't want, and what I have got here. And there's certain things that are absolutely not compromisable. I mean, you don't want somebody who's got all these skeletons in the closet and who's going to be abusing you, from time to time, where I had a patient who said, well, he only hits me once a year. Well, when I started to work with her, she was hit every day. So in her mind, once a year wasn't so bad, but once a year, once every 1,000 years is never okay. So there's certain things that are not compromisable. The skeletons in the closet, the communication, the problem solving, the emotional intimacy, the sexual chemistry one can work on if that does not happen to work exactly the way you want it. But those are the things that you cannot and should not and must not ever, ever, ever compromise. And it takes a lot of honesty with oneself.
Isn't it funny? That seems so simple, but yet it's so hard for people.
It is so hard because we make a lot of excuses for people's bad behavior because of our own longing for love and connection and happily ever after. And unless we start to take this seriously, we are going to continue every week on my Ask Beatty show on the Progressive Radio Network. I'm citing the same statistics. I've been citing the same statistics on this show for 12 years.
Well, Beatty, I will tell you, I am on the crusade with you.
Good.
To educate people, to wake people up, to teach them about a formula approach to love. I am on this crusade to have every person find their person because I believe it's possible. So I look forward to many more conversations with you, figuring out a way to spread the word, to teach people there is a way out of loneliness. There is a way to find a real heartful connection. Right. And why don't you tell our audience, if you could, how they could find your work and find more writings about your formula?
Well, they can go to my website, beattycohan.com. And if you happen to Google Beatty Cohan Dance Papers, you are going to find, as of today, 75 Ask Beatty columns. I've been writing for Dance Papers for the past 3 years, 2 columns a month, which are going to actually be incorporated into another book. And I only wish that I had had those words of wisdom years ago when I was starting out in my own dating and relationship life. And this has been a pleasure, Patricia.
Oh, it's been a pleasure for me too. Again, relationship education is the word of the day. I'm with you. I'm going to join you. I'm going to figure out more ways to work on education because it's something that's achievable for everyone
Absolutely.
and it's attainable, and you don't have to have a lonely heart. So
That's
thank you
exactly
so
right.
much for sharing your words of wisdom. I look forward to more conversations. Thank you, Beatty.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Don't forget to follow us on your favorite podcast platform. Please give us a 5-star rating and leave a review so more people can listen in to Heartbreak and Hope with Pat Barbarito.